Welcome to the channel. Today, we're diving into the fascinating story of Karl Marx, the man whose ideas shook the world and changed history forever. From his early life to his revolutionary philosophy, we'll explore how Marx's vision shaped the way we understand society, politics, and economics. So, if you're curious about the man behind the movement and want to uncover the history that still impacts us today, you're in the right place. Let's get started. I'm not the kind of man who usually posts on forums like this. Most of my life, I've been concerned with economic theory, historical materialism, and, well, fomenting global revolution. But betrayal? That hits different when it's not a monarch or a capitalist, when it's your own wife. I'm Karl. Yes, that Karl. And I need to talk about Jenny. You probably know her as my loyal partner, the ever-patient revolutionary wife who bore the burden of poverty and exile. That's the narrative. But the truth? The truth is a lot messier. And I'm tired of being silent. I've shouted about class struggle from rooftops, but I never talked about the struggle in my own damn home. Jenny and I met when we were young and idealistic. She came from money, I came from anger. We fell fast, the kind of romantic whirlwind that makes you think you finally found a comrade in arms. For a while, it worked. She believed in me, supported my writing, edited my sloppy German, and endured our life of bouncing between cities with no income except the pity pennies Engels sent me from his daddy's factory profits. But then came the little lies. The weird moments. Things that didn't add up. Like the time she said she sold one of her family's silver spoons to help pay rent, but I found the exact same spoon weeks later hidden inside the pocket lining of her coat. Or the moment she started insisting on going alone to meet sympathizers who wanted to support our cause. Sympathizers? She couldn't name one of them. Just vague noblemen who never seemed to write me a single letter. At first, I ignored it. I rationalized. I thought maybe I was paranoid, overworked, tired, maybe even a little delusional from too much time debating Hegelian dialectics with broke students and arguing with anarchists who don't know their ass from a base superstructure model. But then, I saw something. So, one night in Brussels, I was up late scribbling notes for what would later become the Communist Manifesto. Jenny had gone out to meet a friend of her father's who supposedly wanted to support the workers' cause. She was wearing her nicer shawl, the one she always insisted was for appearances only. I didn't think much of it until she came home, flustered. Not tired. Not cold. Not even annoyed. Flustered. That weird mixture of guilt and adrenaline. She rushed past me, muttered something about being exhausted, and went straight to bed. Didn't even look at my notes, which she usually skimmed and gave her, very aggressive, edits on. I found that odd. Now, I'm not a jealous man by nature. I barely had time for jealousy. But that night I couldn't sleep. Something felt off. The kind of off that doesn't just sit in your chest, it itches under your skin. I went to hang up her shawl and found a man's cravat stuffed in the inside lining. Not mine. Not Engels's. Not a style I'd seen on any of the people we worked with. This one was fancy. Clean. Perfumed. It reeked of privilege. I confronted her the next morning. Asked her, calmly at first, whose it was. She said she had no idea what I was talking about. I showed her the cravat, and she laughed. Not like, "Ha, that's ridiculous." No, it was that sharp, bitter kind of laugh someone uses when they know they're cornered, but think they can still talk their way out of it. She said, and I quote, "Oh, Karl, are you going to start turning every misplaced handkerchief into a bourgeois conspiracy?" I should have walked out then, but I didn't. I wanted to believe it was just some stupid misunderstanding. Maybe it was a gift someone gave her? Maybe she was trying to sell it? Maybe. No. I knew. And once you know, it's like you can't unknow. Everything changes. You see the cracks, and you realize they were always there. You just told yourself they were shadows. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about loyalty, trust, ideological alignment. If she was lying to me about this, what else was she lying about? Who was funding her little outings? And then came the letters. It was a rainy Tuesday when I found them. I'd been looking for my early notes on commodity fetishism, yes, irony noted, and decided to dig through an old writing box Jenny kept locked under our bed. She always said it was where she kept sentimental keepsakes from her childhood. I'd respected that boundary for years. But after the cravat incident, that boundary didn't feel sacred anymore. It felt suspicious. I broke the lock. Don't ask how, it was the most bourgeois-looking thing in our entire apartment, and I shattered it with the heel of my boot like a drunk blacksmith. Inside, amid dried-up ink pens and a faded locket I'd never seen her wear, I found a stack of folded parchment letters, tied neatly with a red ribbon. They weren't from her family. They weren't from any party member or comrade. They were from a man named Friedrich, not Engels. Another Friedrich, Count Friedrich von Hardenberg. Yes, a noble, a literal titled aristocrat, a man whose very existence I had railed against in lectures, pamphlets, and drunken debates at the tavern. The letters were intimate, not overtly sexual, no filthy confessions, just worse, tenderness, admiration, understanding. He talked about how much he admired her spirit and how the revolution was in her eyes, but never in her heart. He offered to help her escape the chaos of her chosen life and said she didn't belong in the shadows of exile with a man consumed by theory. That last one cut. I'll admit it. She never showed me these. Never even mentioned this man. But the timeline matched up. These letters had dates from as far back as our time in Paris, when I was scraping together scraps of ideas between political expulsions and illness. She was writing him while I was writing history. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Everything collapsed. My chest tightened in that embarrassing, vulnerable way you pray never happens in front of another human being. I wasn't mad, not yet. I was broken, disoriented, betrayed not just as a man, but as a thinker, as someone who had believed we were building something together, that we were comrades in more than name. I waited 2 days before I confronted her. She cried, claimed it was harmless correspondence, said he was a childhood friend, a man who didn't mean anything. She even pulled the, "I thought you'd be too jealous to understand" card. Jealous? Lady, I've been exiled from 4 countries. I've stared down police raids, poverty, starvation, and academic ridicule. But apparently a cravat and a count are where I draw the line. But the worst part wasn't the lies. It was how she smiled, when she saw how hurt I was. As if she'd finally proven that I wasn't invincible. That's when I started to understand. This wasn't just about her. This was about control. And I had none. So I did what any betrayed revolutionary with no money, no sleep, and no emotional regulation would do. I stormed into Engels's apartment and demanded we drink. He didn't ask questions at first, just poured the cognac and nodded like a man who'd seen the storm clouds building. He always did have that aristocratic sixth sense for drama. I laid it all out. The cravat, the letters, the damn smile. I expected him to be furious on my behalf. I expected righteous indignation, a toast to solidarity, maybe even a rousing call to kick her out and refocus on the movement. Instead, he said nothing for a full minute. Then he took a slow sip, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "I wasn't going to tell you this, Carl, but she wrote to me too." I swear I thought the room tilted. "What do you mean?" I asked, more bark than voice. He sighed like a man unburdening a ghost. "She came to me last year. Said she was worried about you. Said you were getting too extreme, too obsessive. Asked if I could talk some sense into you. Keep you grounded. At first, I thought it was love. Now I think it was strategy." "Strategy?" I asked, genuinely nauseated. He nodded. "I think she's playing sides, Carl. Between us, between your work and her comfort, between the revolution and survival. She's always been split. You just never saw it because you were too in love to notice." And then he said something that really burned. "She believes in you, but not in the world you're trying to build." I wanted to throw the glass at the wall. At him. At myself. Was I so obsessed with tearing down capitalism that I'd failed to see the feudal relic sleeping beside me every night? Engels wasn't unsympathetic, but he was brutally honest. He said I had a choice. Confront her fully or accept that she would never be part of the revolution the way I wanted her to be. He said something else, too low, almost whispered. "If she hasn't betrayed you physically yet, she's waiting for the right moment. And if she has, would it change your work?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. I went home drunk and furious. Not just at Jenny. At everything. The struggle, the exile, the theory, the people we thought we trusted. And then the final blow came, the visitor. He knocked on our door 2 days later. Clean boots. Well-tailored coat. Noble posture. I didn't know him, but he knew me. 2 days after my talk with Engels, I was still stewing, writing and rewriting sentences that made no sense, scrawling alienation over and over like it was some kind of exorcism. Then came the knock. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't timid. It was confident. Like someone who expected the door to open because, in his world, doors always did. I answered. He introduced himself in perfect French. "Count Friedrich von Hardenberg. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance." "Jenny." My blood ran cold. He didn't look smug. He didn't look guilty. He looked disappointed, like I was a failed investment. I'd hoped we wouldn't have to meet like this, he said, stepping into my home without being invited. But your wife insisted she was done hiding things. I should have punched him. I know that's what most men would have done, and part of me wanted to, but I was so tired. My soul was cracked porcelain. And honestly, I needed answers more than I needed revenge. He sat at my table, looked around at the stacks of ink-stained pages, the empty bottles, the threadbare rug. Then he said it. She's been staying at my estate on and off. Since Paris. I didn't speak. Couldn't. I was too busy trying not to throw up. She told me she still loved you, he added, which felt like someone trying to douse a fire with oil. But that she was suffocating. That your cause mattered more than she did. I asked him why he was here. He said, and this will never leave me. Because she wants both worlds. And I suspect you're about to deny her one of them. He left a letter, sealed with wax in her handwriting. I didn't open it. I burned it. Not for drama. Not to make a statement. But because I knew whatever was in there would either weaken me or break me entirely. And I needed to be strong for what came next. Because that night, she came home, smiling, like nothing happened. She came through the door like she'd just stepped out to pick up bread. Hair tied up, cheeks pink from the wind, humming. Not a care in the world. Meanwhile, I was standing there like the human embodiment of betrayal and acid reflux. I didn't say a word at first. I waited. Let her put down her bag, hang her coat, stretch her arms like she'd just returned from a lecture, not from another man's estate. Finally, I said, he came here. Her humming stopped. She turned slowly. Who? Von Hardenberg. And then she did it. The thing manipulators do when they know they're caught but haven't figured out how to spin it yet. She laughed. You're being ridiculous, she said, walking past me into the kitchen. Friedrich is just an old friend. You probably misunderstood him. Misunderstood? He said you stayed with him. She blinked. Quick, calculating. Then the real gaslight started. Carl, she said, calm as winter, do you ever hear yourself? Do you know how obsessed you become? It's always class this, theory that. Do you even remember the last time you asked me how I felt? I couldn't believe it. She was flipping it, turning her affair into my character flaw. You lied to me, I said. For years. She didn't deny it. Instead, she went cold. And then she said the lowest thing anyone has ever said to me. At least he listens. At least he doesn't treat me like a footnote in his manifesto. I nearly hit the wall with my fist. Not her. Never her. But I saw red. That comment cracked something open inside me I didn't even know was sealed. The rage, the humiliation, the years of devotion twisted into footnotes and half-smiles. It all flooded up. And then, suddenly, it stopped. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't in a marriage. I was in a power struggle I'd been too idealistic to recognize. I didn't say another word. I walked out, slammed the door, and sat on a bench in the rain like a ghost of a man who once believed love and revolution could coexist under the same roof. Spoiler, they can't. Not when one person is building a future and the other is keeping a back door open. So it's 1 a.m., and I'm soaked, shaking, half drunk on shame and rainwater, knocking on Engels's door like some tragic Dickensian side character. He opens it in a nightshirt, bleary-eyed, and just says, "She said something awful, didn't she?" I nod. He lets me in without another word. I sit down on his couch, and before I can even process what I'm about to say, I ask him, "Did you ever sleep with her?" Silence. A long one. Then he says, slowly, painfully, "No, Carl. But I came close once. And that's something I've regretted ever since." He pours us both a drink, even though I don't need another, and tells me a story I didn't ask for but couldn't stop hearing. 3 years ago. Brussels. I was away, meeting with radical thinkers, writing furiously. Jenny had stayed behind with Engels to handle some arrangements. He said she kissed him. He didn't reciprocate, at least that's what he claims, but she told him she felt unseen by me. That I was married to the people more than I was to her. That he understood her loneliness. She wanted me to tell you were pushing her away, Engels said. I didn't. I thought it was a phase. A moment. I told myself you two were solid. Then came the real gut punch. She wrote me a letter last month. I didn't show you. I should have. He reached into a drawer and pulled it out, crumpled, tear-stained, and real. In it, she called me mechanical. She said I was more devoted to the idea of justice than to those who love you. She said Engels still made her feel like a woman, not just a revolutionary's accessory. And then, the last line. If I'd married Friedrich, at least I wouldn't have had to beg to be touched. I didn't cry. I couldn't cry. It was like my soul was locked in a box and someone kept throwing rocks at it. The woman I'd fought for, sacrificed for, dragged into exile for, had written a love letter to my best friend while I was busy trying to write Das Kapital. I stared at the letter for a long time. Didn't say anything. Then I got up, walked to the fire, and burned it, just like the one from Hardenberg. Engels asked me what I was going to do. And I said, I'm going to finish the book. And then I'm going to leave her. So I walked back into that house the next morning with one mission in mind. Tell her it's over. No yelling, no begging, just the finality of truth. She's already in the kitchen. The kettle's hissing. The air smells like chamomile and dread. She looks up, eyes puffy, but don't be fooled. Jenny could cry on command better than a stage actress. I say, we need to talk. She says, I already know. Of course she does. Engels, ever the guilt-ridden gentleman, sent her a note. He thought I should be prepared, she tells me, as if that softens anything. I say it plainly. I want a separation. You live your life, I'll live mine. The children stay with me. That's when the theatrics start. She collapses into the chair like she's been shot. Oh, Carl, you can't take them from me. They're all I have left. Cue the waterworks. But I hold firm. I tell her they've seen enough deceit, enough cold shoulders and sly remarks. I won't let her manipulate them too. And then? She pulls out the nuclear option. I'm dying. Yep, just like that. No warning. No diagnosis. Just 3 words engineered to detonate every ounce of resolve I had. I stare at her, jaw clenched. What are you talking about? She says she's been feeling weaker. That something's not right. That she didn't want to worry me. And she caps it off with, if this is the end, I want us to be whole again. And for 1 week, pathetic second, I actually believe her. Until I find out later, thanks to our housemaid, bless her honesty, that Jenny had faked fainting the week before, right in front of the girls. Told them Daddy didn't care if she died. That he'd rather be married to a book. The kids stopped talking to me after that. My own daughters. I was the villain in their eyes, and she, the deceiver, was the wounded heroine. I didn't leave that day. Or the next. I stayed because I couldn't bear the thought of the children crying for their mother. I stayed because I was weak, and shamefully loyal to the memory of the woman I thought she used to be. But inside, I was already gone. I stayed longer than I should have. And every day I didn't leave, I felt myself rot a little more inside. Like I was a guest in my own misery. Just existing. Breathing in her perfume and bitterness. Sharing meals with children who looked at me like I was the one who burned the house down. Then came the breaking point. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the clock in the hallway stopped at 3:42 p.m., right when I heard the shouting. Loud. Panicked. Our eldest, Laura, was screaming. I rushed upstairs. There she was crying, red-faced, holding a crumpled letter she'd pulled from Jenny's sewing desk. And Jenny? She was pale. Mouth open. Caught. Again. I asked Laura what happened, and she handed me the letter. It was from Hardenberg. Dated 2 weeks ago. After our supposed reconciliation. The words blurred as I read, but I got the gist. Jenny had written to him again, saying she missed the warmth of their conversations and was trapped in a gray fog of guilt and obligation. She asked if he could arrange for a visit under the pretense of a health retreat. She was going to leave me, after all this, just in a way that still made her look like the victim. I looked at her. This woman I had dragged across Europe, starved with, shared exile with. Who bore my children? Who I loved when I had nothing but angry dreams. And she said it again. You pushed me to this. I didn't say a word. I packed a bag. Quietly. Deliberately. She didn't try to stop me. Not because she was noble, but because she knew she had lost the last piece of leverage she had, my belief in her. I walked out into the cold with nothing but a suitcase, a stack of half-finished pages of Das Kapital, and the crushing weight of wasted loyalty. That night, I slept on Engels's couch again. But this time, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just wrote. Because the only thing left to love, to trust, was the cause. The idea that no worker, no partner, no soul should ever be owned again. 3 months after I left, I was living in a cramped attic above a pub in Soho, writing by candlelight and surviving on tea, tobacco, and political indignation. I hadn't seen Jenny, hadn't spoken to my daughters, and honestly, I was doing better than I expected, until I got the letter. It arrived folded into thirds, tucked into a plain envelope with no return address. Just a shaky Carl, written on the front like we were still in some tragic teenage drama. I stared at it for a full hour before I opened it. The handwriting was hers, curved, elegant, and familiar enough to punch me in the chest. She started it with "Dear Carl," which already told me she was lying. When Ginny was real with me, she always called me Old Bear. If I was Carl, I was getting a performance. And oh, what a performance it was. She wrote about how the house felt cold without me, how the children asked about me, how she couldn't breathe some nights and thought she might pass in her sleep. But nowhere in the 2 pages did she say sorry. She implied it. She circled it. But she never landed on it. What she did instead was twist everything back into something heroic. She said, "Maybe my greatest sin was wanting more from you than you had left to give. Not, I lied. Not, I hurt you." Just some philosophical crap about emotional hunger, like she was Rousseau with a side of opera tears. I should have torn it up. Instead, I wrote her back. Yep, stupid. But I had things I needed to say. I told her she wasn't the villain, that I wasn't either, that we were just two people who broke apart under the weight of the world. But most importantly, I said, "You don't get to rewrite this story, Ginny. You lit the match." I never got a response. But a week later, I ran into Laura, our daughter, on the street. She didn't hug me. She didn't yell. She just looked at me and said, "She said you abandoned us." And that, reader, was the moment I realized Ginny never wanted me back. She just didn't want to lose control of the narrative. After the disaster with Ginny, I thought I'd be done with complicated relationships for a while. Turns out, heartbreak is like the proletariat. It rises again, no matter how many times you try to suppress it. Enter Helene. She was everything Ginny wasn't: fiery, sharp, deeply invested in the revolution, and, frankly, a breath of fresh air after years of cold silence and betrayal. We met at a rally in London. I was delivering a speech about class struggle. She was organizing workers in the crowd. Our conversations flowed from Marx's theory to personal confessions. She seemed to understand the man behind the manifesto. I almost let myself believe she was different. For months, it felt like I was being pulled out of the ruins. Helene was passionate, supportive, and didn't play games. Or so I thought. But then, one night, after a long meeting, I found her whispering on the phone with someone I didn't recognize. Her tone sharp, secretive. She hung up abruptly when I walked in. "I have to keep some things private, Carl," she said, with that faint smirk I'd seen too often before. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to trust. But soon enough, I found out she was planning to use our relationship to climb higher in the party's ranks. The irony. I was supposed to be the one educating her about exploitation, and instead, I was being played like a pawn. The betrayal stung like fresh ink on old wounds. I realized then that not all battles are fought with swords or pamphlets. Some are fought in the quiet moments when you hand your heart over and pray it won't be used against you. I walked away again. This time, more cautious, more guarded. If you think politics is messy, try mixing it with your personal life and then setting it all on fire. Around this time, everything felt like it was falling apart: friendships, alliances, and my own heart. Ingalls and I had always been tight, but after Ginny's betrayal and Helene's manipulation, I found myself doubting even him. Paranoia? Maybe. But when your closest friend knows your deepest wounds, betrayal feels like a cold shadow lurking in every conversation. We clashed. Not just about strategy or ideology, but trust. I accused him of hiding things. He accused me of losing my focus. It was brutal. I won't lie, our friendship cracked under the pressure. For months, I felt isolated in a crowd of comrades. Meanwhile, my enemies smelled blood. Rivals in the movement whispered about my broken home, trying to paint me as weak, a man too distracted by love to lead a revolution. Their words cut deep. But here's the twist. Amid all this chaos, something inside me started to shift. The cause, the dream I dedicated my life to, became my refuge. When human relationships betrayed me, the idea of liberation stayed true. I buried myself in writing. Das Kapital was no longer just a book. It was my rebellion against betrayal, against broken hearts, against a world that seemed designed to tear people apart. Just as I was wrapping up Das Kapital, feeling a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could turn my pain into something meaningful, Ginny struck again. It was a Sunday morning. I received a letter, not from her this time, but from one of our neighbors. the kind who knows everyone's business and delights in chaos. The letter contained a crude pamphlet with a twisted version of my life story. Karl Marx, the failed husband, the absent father, the man who abandoned his family for radical fantasies. It was everywhere, pinned to bulletin boards, slipped under doors, and whispered in the taverns where workers gathered. Jenny had hired someone to spread rumors, to destroy what little reputation I had left among the very people I wanted to help. The betrayal hit harder than any personal wound because it was public. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was about everything I stood for. I felt shattered, defeated, like I'd been dragged through the mud, and all for what? But then, something shifted. I realized that the personal and political were inseparable. Betrayal wasn't just about heartbreak. It was a reflection of the very systems I was fighting. And if I wanted to change the world, I had to start by reclaiming my story. After Jenny's public smear campaign, I had two choices: retreat into bitterness or rise with purpose. Bitter, I was plenty. But defeat? That wasn't in my DNA. So I grabbed my pen, my weapon, and started to fight back. Not with insults or anger, but with truth. I wrote articles, gave speeches, and laid bare my life and my work for anyone willing to listen. Engels, despite our earlier conflicts, was my rock through this. He stood by me when others turned their backs, helping me edit, publish, and even finance the distribution of my writings. Slowly, the tide began to turn. People saw beyond the gossip and rumors. They saw the man dedicated to fighting injustice, not the caricature Jenny tried to paint. But the real breakthrough came unexpectedly. One day, I received a letter from Laura, my eldest daughter. It was tentative but honest, apologizing for believing the lies, asking for a chance to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a start. It reminded me that even in the darkest betrayals, there's room for healing. So here we are, the end of the road, or maybe just the beginning of a new one. Looking back, my life with Jenny was a brutal education in love, trust, and heartbreak. It showed me that even the strongest bonds can crack under pressure, and sometimes, the people we love the most can hurt us the deepest. But here's what I learned, and what I want to share with anyone who's been betrayed. Don't lose yourself trying to fix someone else. I spent years trying to hold together a relationship that was already broken. Love isn't about fixing. It's about two people growing together. If one person isn't willing, you can't force it. Your worth isn't defined by someone else's actions. Jenny's lies, deceit, and betrayal hurt, but they don't define who I am. Neither should they define you. Healing is a process, not a switch. It took time, patience, and a lot of writing and some whiskey to rebuild my sense of self. That's okay. Be kind to yourself. Find your revolution inside and out. For me, it was the cause, my work, my friendships with comrades like Engels. Find what gives you strength and purpose. Forgiveness isn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes, forgiving is just about freeing yourself from the chains of anger and resentment. Would I have chosen differently if I could? Maybe. But every betrayal shaped me into the man who wrote about class struggle and the fight for a better world. So if you're out there feeling lost because someone you trusted turned out to be a liar or worse, know you're not alone. You can survive. You can grow. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find a revolution waiting inside you too. Thanks for sticking with my story. If anyone wants to talk more about betrayal, relationships, or just needs a virtual shoulder, my inbox is open. Stay strong.